All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're digging into a source that flips our whole understanding of the 19th century on its head. You know, we think of it as this age of progress, right? But this theory asks us to look at all the nonstop worldwide conflict that was really going on.
And this is the question at the heart of it all. What if the history we learned in school, a bunch of separate, unrelated wars, was actually a cover story for something much, much bigger?
So let's start with the timeline. Just look at this. In the span of about 2 decades, the entire planet basically bursts into flames. You've got Europe, China, India, America, South America. The source makes a great point. If fires break out in every single room of your house at the same time, you don't blame bad wiring, you start looking for an arsonist.
And that's the core of the theory right there. This wasn't a series of unfortunate events. It was a hidden world war, a coordinated global campaign that was later chopped up in the history books to hide what was really going on.
Okay, so let's dig into the evidence that the source puts forward for this synchronized slaughter. And we're going to start with the casualty numbers, because they're just staggering.
The sheer scale is the first clue. I mean, the Taiping Rebellion in China, we're talking up to 30 million people dead. 30 million! The source asks, are we really supposed to believe that angry peasants with pitchforks and shovels caused that level of carnage? That kind of death toll takes an industrial-level war machine.
And that same way of thinking gets applied to the American Civil War. The theory suggests the whole war over slavery narrative was a cover for the real goal, to wipe out a territory that was filled with these incredible ancient cities, architecture that, let's be honest, doesn't look like it was built by pioneers in covered wagons. The goal, it claims, was to destroy the buildings to erase the memory of who really built them. And then you have Paraguay. 90%. 90% of the entire male population wiped out. The source doesn't even call it a war. It calls it a cleansing, a targeted genocide. Why? Well, the theory goes that Paraguay was this holdout, a self-sufficient society that was preserving old world knowledge, and it just had to be eliminated.
So, all of this just leads to one massive question. If this was a coordinated worldwide attack, who was the enemy? Who was so powerful that it took this kind of global effort to bring them down?
Well, the source has an answer. A huge, forgotten civilization it calls Tartary. And this wasn't just some country. It was supposedly a global network of city-states, a whole civilization that shared technology and culture. And then, after these wars, poof, it just vanishes from all the maps.
So what did this lost world look like? Well, the theory points to all this grand classical-style architecture you see everywhere, from India to Australia to American state capitals. It argues these cities were already there, fully built. The pioneers and colonists we see in the old photos, they didn't build them. They just moved into the empty shells after the original inhabitants were removed.
Okay, but how do you destroy a global civilization? You're not going to do it with cannons and muskets. According to this theory, they use something way, way more advanced. The key piece of physical evidence here is something called vitrification. It sounds complicated, but all it means is rock and brick getting so hot that it literally melts and turns into glass.
And to put that into perspective, you need to get granite up to over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit to melt it. A 19th century cannonball filled with gunpowder doesn't even come close, not even in the same ballpark. And yet, the source says you can find photos of melted forts and vitrified bricks from this era.
The Great Chicago Fire is presented as Exhibit A. We all know the official story, right? A cow kicks over a lantern in a wooden barn. But then you look at the pictures of the aftermath. We're talking acres of stone and brick buildings just pulverized, steel beams melted and twisted like spaghetti. The cause and the effect just don't add up.
So this leads to a pretty wild conclusion in the source material. These so-called Great Fires in Chicago, Boston, Moscow, they weren't accidents. They were attacks. Strategic hits with some kind of directed energy weapon that could literally turn stone to dust and melt metal.
But destroying the cities, that was just step one. You still have to make sure nobody remembers what was there before. So the source then lays out this incredibly elaborate cover-up. And here's the alleged playbook. First, you obliterate the infrastructure. Then, you bury the evidence under what the theory calls a mud flood, some kind of event that buried the old world under feet of dirt, which is why so many old buildings have their ground floors underground.
Then comes the weird part. You show off the few remaining cities, and then you totally reprogram the survivors.
Now, this part of the theory is really out there. It suggests the spectacular World's Fairs weren't built out of plaster for a 6-month event. No, they were actual, surviving ancient cities that were fixed up, put on display for the world to see, and then immediately demolished, erasing the last physical proof. So you got to ask why? Why go through all this trouble? What was the point of this planet-sized demolition and deception? And the answer, according to the source, was to completely reset human civilization. It was about replacing a world that had free, clean energy with one that runs on dirty fossil fuels you can control and sell. It was about replacing open knowledge with schools that teach a very specific, approved history, and replacing a unified world with one broken up into squabbling nations.
And this might be the most chilling part of the whole theory, that the reset wasn't just about buildings and books, but about people. The source points to the crazy population boom and all the massive orphanages that popped up in the late 19th century as proof that the original population was largely replaced with a new stock of humans who had no memory of the world before.
And so, that's the final haunting question this whole theory leaves us with. Are we the children of the few who survived an apocalypse, trying to rebuild? Or are we the descendants of settlers who were moved into these beautiful empty cities and were just told a brand new story about where they came from? According to this source, the answer to that question changes absolutely everything.